Hello, cruel world. So welcome to A Psych for Sore Minds. I'm your host, Dr. Sohom Das. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess and rehabilitate mentally disordered offenders. So I work in prisons and in courts and in secure forensic psychiatric units. And I also work as an expert witness. So I give advice to judges during criminal court trials across the UK. So this channel that you're watching, A Psych for Sore Minds, it dissects a whole range of mental health topics, some of which are related to like violence and offending, which is my specialty, like this episode. And some episodes are a lot more common mental illnesses. This channel, A Psych for Sore Minds, is the only YouTube channel that covers both true crime and mental illness and the overlap between the two. Ronnie Kray, along with his identical twin brother Reggie, were notorious celebrity gangsters that operated in London in the swinging 60s. Both of them were convicted for various crimes in 1969. For Reggie, this included murder. So he walked into a pub and he shot a rival gang member in the head because of a gay slur. Ronnie was, by the way, gay. Ronnie was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and he was sectioned to Broadmoor Hospital in 1979 and he died there of a heart attack in 1995. So, what was Ronnie Kray's psychological makeup? How did his symptoms contribute to his crimes? What other factors drove his offending? And could Ronnie have eventually been discharged from Broadmoor? And even what is Broadmoor? What is the purpose of Broadmoor? I'm going to be answering all of those questions and more. And on top of all of that, I'm going to give you my own psychological formulation and my own theories about why Kray committed his murder in this video. You're watching a series of around 6 real-life patients that I'm going to be talking about who are from Broadmoor. I'm going to be giving you my professional insights and my theories as a forensic psychiatrist. I actually worked in Broadmoor Hospital as a middle grade psychiatrist around 7 years ago. I've already done one video on this series about Robert Mordsley, who's an English serial killer, so you should go and check that out. So first, let me tell you a bit about the Krays' background. So the twins were born in October 1933. As I said, Ronnie died in March 1995 at the age of 61 from a heart attack whilst he was in Broadmoor. And the twins basically controlled organised crime in the East End of London. The Krays committed murder, armed robbery, arson, protection rackets, assaults. Plus, there's rumours that they would have boxes of cereal and put them back before the cereal was even finished. They were both convicted in 1969 to life imprisonment. Ronnie was sectioned to Broadmoor a whole 10 years later in 1979, which to me suggests he must have been relatively well for at least some of that time psychiatrically in prison, because 10 years is a very long time before eventual discharge. So going back into their earlier years, as kids during the Second World War, they were both evacuated to Suffolk and both twins took up amateur boxing. They were both called up for national service in the British Army in 1952, and they took exception to this. They attempted to leave. Ronnie actually smashed the jaw of a corporal in charge who tried to stop them leaving. And unsurprisingly, they were both dishonorably discharged from the army. And while they were serving their sentence for this, their behavior was atrocious. They had thrown feces at a sergeant. They threw hot tea on a particular guard, which is just as bad, but to be fair, slightly more hygienic. They handcuffed a guard to the prison bars at one point. They set their own bedding on fire. They assaulted another guard with a vase and they smashed the vase on the head and used that as a means to escape, which might not be the most effective way of escaping, but it's definitely the most slapstick and I would highly recommend it. And then after all of that, they became full-time criminals. So they were involved in hijacking, armed robbery, arson, but they also acquired nightclubs and other properties and started to become quite influential in the West End. So for the overseas viewers, the East End of London tends to be quite rough, and that's where the Krays were from. And the West End of London is thought to be a bit more kind of glamorous. That is, for example, where all the main theatre shows are held. What's unique about the Krays, I think, is because they were celebrities in their own right as well as criminals. And we all know that if you've made a life of crime, you need to go legit. So they had had legitimate businesses. They were in fact nightclub owners, and they would brush shoulders with their celebrity friends, who would include Frank Sinatra, Shirley Bassey, Cliff Richard, Barbara Windsor, rest in peace. I have to say, Cliff Richard is the one that surprises me the most about all of them. So if you're foreign, or if you're not as old as I am, you might not know who he is, but he's this like sweet elderly crooner, but he's got this real sort of goody two shoes image. He does like Christian songs. He, supports family values. So it's kind of like the equivalent of Mary Berry hanging out with the Gallagher brothers, or for my American brethren, it's kind of like Dolly Parton hanging out with Nicki Minaj, or it's kind of like Bill Crosby from the 80s hanging out with Bill Crosby nowadays. So the tabloids revealed that Ronnie was in a sexual relationship with Lord Boothby, who was a Tory, which was actually quite a big deal at the time because homosexuality was still a criminal offence back then in 1964. So let's talk about Ronnie's murder. So Ronnie Kray walked into a pub and shot George Cornell, a member of a rival gang, in a pub in Whitechapel in March in 1966. So the victim had apparently previously called Ronnie a fat puff, which is, if you don't know, a derogatory term for gay men. And there was a big shootout between the two gangs the previous day. And then Cornell, by chance, was drinking in a random pub, which is only a mile away from where the Krays lived. And by doing that, obviously he broke one of the cardinal rules of being a gangster, which are, as we all know, don't get high for your own supply, snitches get stitches, and if possible, you should escape by smashing a vase or a vase on your captors, and also don't socialize on enemy turf, aka don't eat where you shit. But Cornell didn't listen to this, went out drinking nearby. Ronnie heard where he was drinking, walked into the pub and shot him in the head in front of everybody. And the next year, which was October 1966, both twins allegedly killed a minor member of their own gang called Jack the Hat McVitie, whose grandfather invented the digestive biscuit. Not really. And they did this because he apparently failed to fulfill a contract that they had prepaid him for, where he was supposed to kill their financial advisor, presumably because they thought this man had too much information which could incriminate them. During their trial, it was actually very hard to get any witnesses to testify against the Krays, which just shows that their reputation must have preceded them, and a lot of witnesses were very intimidated. But eventually they managed to get the barmaid who was there at the time when Kray shot McVitie to testify. And what I think is quite interesting, it was later found out that even from Broadmoor Hospital, and even when his brother Reggie was in prison, Ronnie still managed to run a business enterprise. He was providing bodyguards for Hollywood stars when they visited London. So Ronnie identified as being bisexual, and he actually planned to marry a woman he'd been dating for almost 3 years. Now, as you might know, there have been a couple of films about the Krays. There's one unimaginatively called The Krays, which was made in 1990, and it starred the brothers from Spandau Ballet, who are Martin and Gary Kemp, and also Legend, which is the 2015 biopic starring Tom Hardy as both of the twins. Spandau Ballet, of course, are famous for their song Gold, and Hardy, of course, is famous for playing Batman's Bane.
When Gotham is in ashes, then you have my permission to die.
Okay, so let's talk a bit about Ronnie's psychological makeup. So my theory is that Ronnie Kray had a personality disorder, specifically antisocial personality disorder. So I'm talking about something that's not a mental illness, which is like a temporary change of your baseline states by specific symptoms, but rather part of your personality. So it's permanent, it's deep, and it's ingrained. Antisocial personality disorder is when the person has no regard for right or wrong. They ignore the rights and the feelings of others. I've done a previous episode on this, so go check that out. People with antisocial personality disorder tend to manipulate other people. They treat them harshly. They have this like callous indifference, and they show little remorse or guilt for their behavior and their actions. People with antisocial personality disorder often violate the law, and they become career criminals. So they might lie, they might be violent, they might act impulsively. They often have problems with alcohol and drugs. And the Krays very much fitted into this picture because they were very versatile criminals, and they were into into, extortion and arson and lots of violence since they were kids and they had their own gang. There was just so much antisocial behavior, from beating up sergeants all the way to murder. So it really kind of fits in with this diagnosis. So in addition to all of that, I think that Ronnie, as part of his natural personality, he was very sensitive to being slighted, particularly about his sexuality, and he would fight anybody who insulted him. And I imagine growing up in that era where being gay or bisexual was less acceptable than it is now probably made him even more kind of sensitive about challenges to his manhood. So when this did happen, he probably felt that he had to act violently. I think another issue is that they didn't really have a father figure. The Krays' father was in and out of their lives, but they were very close and they had this close gang. So I think they kind of gave each other their moral code, and they almost fed off each other, and they gave each other permission to act in this kind of antisocial way, terrorizing the neighborhood. I think another element is their reputation. So not only were they gangsters, but they were glamorous celebrities as well. They had nice cars, they had clothes, they had celebrity friends. So there might have been many other peers that were kind of jealous of them. So the Krays knew they had to hold their position as alpha males, so they couldn't permit any subordination. So they had to be violent and aggressive to stay on top. So now I'd like to talk about Ronnie's mental illness. So Ronnie Kray was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and he was medicated for many years, both in the community and in prison, and then latterly in Broadmoor, although Broadmoor, as well as medication, there would have been like rehabilitation as well. And presumably his illness must have been treatment resistant to a degree, because he was in Broadmoor for 20 years and he was never transferred back to prison, suggesting that he didn't get significantly better in that time. Now, I mentioned his mental illness, but in my personal opinion, I think that Ronnie Kray's antisocial behavior was more significant in terms of his offending than his schizophrenia, for the following reasons. Firstly, the antisocial personality disorder preceded schizophrenia, but most importantly, we've got a very unusual situation here, which is that we've got identical twins, which obviously mean they have the exact same genetic makeup and the same personality structure, and they both committed crimes. So even though one had schizophrenia, Ronnie, and that might have contributed to a degree, for example, making him more paranoid, I think he still would have been antisocial and still would have committed crimes even without the schizophrenia, because the identical genetic version of himself, i.e. Reggie, did those things. So could Ronnie Kray ever have been released from Broadmoor Hospital? The answer is yes, potentially. So I've treated other patients who might not have been as high profile as Ronnie Kray, but I think are potentially more dangerous. People who have killed, for example, and some of these people have eventually been rehabilitated and eventually been released into the community. And whether they will eventually depends on a number of factors. First of all, if they've gotten over their acute symptoms. So in Ronnie's case, if he was given antipsychotics, if they worked, if it helped assuage his paranoia, and if he engaged in psychotherapy sessions. This would help him gain insight, and if he was able to show that his overall risk had been reduced. So it's actually very rare for somebody to be released directly from high secure hospital. It does happen, but only when people recover exceptionally quickly. Much more often, they step down to a medium secure unit, and in this secure unit, they're tested on leave, and if everything's well, if there's no aggression on the ward, if they engage with their therapy, then they're eventually discharged. Stepping down even further to low security does happen, but it's even rarer, but it's for people who need very long-term rehabilitation. Okay, so let's get back to basics. What is Broadmoor? Well, it's a high secure hospital, and it's in Crowthorne, which is a little village in Berkshire, which is in the southeast of England. Incidentally, Berkshire is where I was born. Broadmoor is the oldest of the 3 high secure hospitals that exist in England. The other 2 are Ashworth, which is near Liverpool, and Rampton, which is in Nottinghamshire. There is a 4th one in the UK, but that's in Scotland, not in England. That's called Carstairs. And I've seen patients in all of those institutions except for Ashworth. Contrary to popular belief, common misconception is that Broadmoor is not a prison. It's a hospital. It previously took female patients, but this has now stopped a few years ago, which I think means that all female high secure patients have to move to Rampton, I believe. You might be interested to know that Broadmoor has been rebooted recently. So there's been a lot of development over the last few years. It's got a new modern updated building on a site that's slightly further away from the original site. That all happened in 2019. So the current Broadmoor has 16 wards and 200 134 beds. I think it's only fair to mention that Broadmoor has had its fair share of controversy. Probably one of the most well-known cases would be Jimmy Savile, who is a prolific sex offender who I'm sure that almost all of you would have heard of. So he regularly abused a lot of the patients in Broadmoor. He undertook voluntary work there, and he was allocated his own room, which is insane. And he was allocated his own set of keys, which is absolutely crazy when you consider how high secure and how seriously Broadmoor takes its security. For example, airport style security on the way in for every single member of staff, even the staff members that work there regularly. So the fact that this non-medical person wasn't even a staff member and he was given keys, it just blows my mind. In terms of more recent controversy, in June 2015, a mental health nurse was imprisoned because they repeatedly sold stories about patients to the tabloids, which were based on stolen medical records and also fabricated documentation. So you might be wondering, what is the purpose of Broadmoor? What's it there for? Well, it's there to rehabilitate all patients, and that's its primary reason, which differentiates it from prison. Some people do get rehabilitated to a degree, but prison's primary goal is to punish, then rehabilitation. Broadmoor as a hospital is there to get patients better. The plan for most patients is to eventually discharge them into the community. Some patients will be there for all of their lives, in which case the goal is to relieve their suffering. So for example, I used to work in the high dependency unit in Broadmoor, and most of the patients there were on long-term seclusion. Most of the patients there will probably be in hospital for the rest of their life. Ronnie Kray was a complicated man. He was also many different things to many different people. He was a son, a brother, a husband. Some people saw him as a criminal, as a celebrity, as a gangster, and as a murderer. Had his life not been cut short by his tragic heart attack, who knows? Maybe he could have recovered from mental illness. Maybe he could have been rehabilitated in terms of his criminality. And for all we know, he could have gone on to have a productive life. I just want to give a quick shout out to my boy Joshua Miles. So he has a true crime channel. There are lots of true crime channels out there on YouTube, but none of them that go into this kind of level of detail of the cases that are professionally edited to this degree. So you have to go check him out. To share with you some interesting, exciting news, which is I'm going to be a speaker at CrimeCon UK. So this is a massive true crime convention. It's been delayed from its original June date to September. You have to come. You will learn about serial killers, unsolved crimes. You'll hear from criminologists, law enforcement agents, and your favorite podcasters. I'll be doing a talk which is about 2 real-life cases of people who have killed their own family members, one of whom I thought was mentally ill and the other one not so much. So if you're a true crime enthusiast, you cannot miss out on CrimeCon UK. Use the link below to get your tickets and use the code PSYCH if you want 10% off. Coming up on this channel, there is more on this series, which is about real-life Broadmoor patients. So I've already done one on Robert Mordsley, who was an English serial killer. And then there's going to be one on Charles Bronson, Kenneth Erskine, otherwise known as the Stockwell Strangler, and the Yorkshire Ripper. In each of these episodes, as well as facts about the crimes and the backgrounds, I'm going to give you my personal insights and my professional experience on certain aspects of their care and about treatment in forensic units in general. You cannot find this anywhere else on YouTube. I'm also going to get a little bit personal in the next episode. I'm going to tell you my own personal experiences of working in Broadmoor as a psychiatric doctor. And there's new episodes out on Tuesdays and Fridays, and all I ask in return is that you subscribe. Remember, there's something for everybody on this channel. I'd like you to comment more on my videos, please. I've been enjoying chatting to you guys recently. If you could also please follow us on Instagram, like our Facebook page, submit an episode idea to our email address, which is psychforsoreminds@gmail.com. And if you're going to reference us, you must use the hashtag PsychSore. I implore you to please tell your favorite people about a Psych for Sore Minds because they deserve it. Spread the love. So all that's left to say is until next time, stay euthymic and please do not forget, I love you.